Poker on TV wasn't just a game, it was a revolution, a late-night spectacle that turned a quiet game of cards into a worldwide phenomenon. At its peak, TV poker was mesmerizing. It brought high-stakes drama, unforgettable personalities, and life-changing moments into millions of living rooms. For a time, it felt invincible. But like a player riding a hot streak who refuses to walk away from the table, Poker TV pushed its luck too far. What began as a cultural explosion fueled by amazing characters eventually collapsed under the weight of its own success. Black Friday struck the industry like a bad beat on the river, but the real story goes deeper. Mismanagement, failed reinventions, and a refusal to adapt to the times turned what was once unmissable entertainment into an irrelevant relic. So, how did Poker TV go from chip leading to busting out entirely? The story isn't just a tale of decline, it's a masterclass in how to not get paid with aces. Poker on TV was an addiction for millions. The stakes, the personalities, the moments that made you sit up and shout at the screen, all of it so immersive.
I didn't mean it like that, Phil. Sorry.
Wow.
When Chris Moneymaker's 2003 WSOP victory hit the airwaves, it was a seismic shift for poker. A complete unknown, walking away with $2.5 million besting the pros, is a story that could sell itself. That moment didn't just elevate poker, it put it on a rocket ship to the mainstream. The timing couldn't have been better. Television executives scrambled to capitalize on poker's newfound fame, and what they created was lightning in a bottle. Shows like High Stakes Poker and Poker After Dark became routine late-night must-watches. Millions of dollars were at risk, but the real currency, the value for the viewer, was the personalities around the table. Phil Hellmuth's grand entrances were pure theatre, a self-proclaimed poker brat who basked in the spotlight and delivered tirades whenever the cards didn't go his way. Across from him, you'd have the quiet menace of Phil Ivey, whose icy stare was enough to make anyone fold out of sheer intimidation. And then there was Gus Hansen, who seemed to play every hand like he had nothing to lose, until he lost $20 million. But that's a story for another day. On top of the players, the production itself was part of the magic. High-stakes poker felt raw, unfiltered, and dangerously authentic. You could hear the shuffle of chips, the nervous tapping on the felt, and the muted tension every time someone reached for their stack. The commentary, led by Gabe Kaplan and AJ Benzer, struck the perfect balance between insightful and irreverent. They didn't explain poker like you were clueless. They assumed you understood the basics and focused on the psychology, the mind games, and the drama. Meanwhile, Poker After Dark offered something different. It was slower, more intimate. No flashy graphics, no gimmicks, just players locked in a mental chess match under dim lighting. You could practically feel the weight of the decisions being made. Watching Tom Dwan execute a bluff that left a room full of pros, speechless felt like witnessing a piece of art being created in real time. It wasn't about the cards, it was about the players, their egos, their fears, and their calculated risks. The appeal of these shows was the stories they told. Every hand had stakes, every bluff had consequences, and every player had something to prove. There was an air of unpredictability that kept viewers hooked. 1 minute, Daniel Negreanu was reading opponents like a book. The next, he was on the receiving end of a cooler, so brutal you'd think the deck had it out for him. These were moments you couldn't script. Barry Greenstein handing out signed copies of his book after crushing someone in a massive pot. Mike Matusow unraveling at the table, his emotions spilling over like a busted dam. Sammy Farha chain-smoking his unlit cig through a high-stakes cash game as if millions of dollars were just another Tuesday. These weren't actors. They were real people playing with real money and real consequences. For years, poker on TV was untouchable. It turned everyday people into dreamers, hopeful that they too could one day sit across from legends and hold their own. The golden age of poker was about the drama, the personalities, and the idea that anything could happen, but the foundation wasn't as solid as it seemed. Beneath the surface, the cracks were forming, and it was only a matter of time before the house of cards came crashing down. And then, the storm hit. It didn't come out of nowhere, but when it landed, it left devastation in its wake. The poker world calls it Black Friday, a day that lives in infamy for anyone who had ever clicked all in from the comfort of their living room. The US Department of Justice brought the hammer down on online poker, shutting down the biggest platforms overnight. Players logged on to find their accounts frozen, their money trapped in cyberspace, and the industry in complete disarray.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry with millions of participants, and on Friday, it was shut down by federal agents.
the end of the world in poker. Everything stopped.
It wasn't just the casual grinders who felt the sting. Online poker had been the lifeblood of the game, feeding a steady stream of new players into live events and creating a culture that thrived on accessibility. Suddenly, that lifeblood was cut off. The dream that Poker TV had sold, the one where anyone could rise from obscurity to stardom, started to feel like a cruel joke. The impact on television was immediate. Sponsors vanished like my action when I get dealt bullets. Networks started second-guessing their investment, and viewership plummeted. Without the influx of new players dreaming of taking their shot, the audience shrank to a die-hard core. But even those fans couldn't prop up a sinking ship. The golden age was losing its shine, and Poker TV began to crumble. What made Black Friday even more devastating was how unprepared the industry was for the fallout. Shows like High Stakes Poker and Poker After Dark were built on the momentum of the poker boom, relying on the idea that the audience would always be there. When that audience started to fade, the networks panicked, budgets were slashed, production quality dipped, and the once vibrant atmosphere of Poker TV grew stale. And then came the network changes. High Stakes Poker, the jewel of televised poker, left its original home and moved to a new channel. On paper, it was a simple transition. In reality, it felt like a complete reboot, and not the good kind. The chemistry was off, the commentary lost its edge, and the magic that had made the show irresistible was gone. The players were still there, the stakes were still high, but something vital had been lost along the way. It was like watching a once great player on the downswing. You could still see glimpses of what made them brilliant, but the fire wasn't there anymore. The audience could feel it, and just like that, poker's brightest star began to flicker. What made it worse was the industry's inability to adapt. Online poker had been gutted, but rather than evolve, Poker TV doubled down on the old formula. They kept churning out the same content, hoping to recapture the magic, but the world had moved on. Streaming platforms like Twitch and YouTube were starting to rise, offering a fresh, interactive way to experience the game. While Poker TV clung to its outdated playbook, a new generation of players was finding its own way forward and innovating. Black Friday wasn't just a setback, it was the beginning of the end for Poker TV as we knew it. The wheels were in motion, and the shows that had once defined an era were now fighting a losing battle against time, technology, and their own complacency. But the downfall wasn't finished yet. The worst was still to come. As the dust from Black Friday began to settle, Poker TV found itself in unfamiliar territory, desperate to stay relevant in a world that was moving on without it. The cracks that had started to form became impossible to ignore, and what followed was a series of decisions that didn't just fail to save poker on television, they drove it further into the ground. High Stakes Poker's move to a new network should have been an opportunity to breathe new life into the show. Instead, it felt like a cheap knockoff of its former self. The charm was gone. The commentary, once sharp and engaging, became bland. Even the players seemed less invested, as if they were just showing up for a paycheck. The show that had once made every hand feel like life or death was now just another poker broadcast. Then Poker After Dark tried to reinvent itself, and the results were awkward. The production leaned too heavily into gimmicks, trying to jazz up a format that never needed fixing. The understated elegance that once defined the show was replaced with forced banter and uninspired gameplay. It was like watching a player try to bluff with their cards face up, painful and doomed from the start. The saturation didn't help either. Networks scrambled to churn out new poker shows, hoping to recreate the magic of the early 2000s. What they got instead were poorly conceived cash games featuring unknown players, weirdly structured formats, and commentary that made even die-hard fans wince. The charm of Poker TV had always been its authenticity, its ability to make you feel like you were sitting at the table with the pros. But these new shows felt like pale imitations, the poker equivalent of a cheap knockoff watch that breaks after a week. What really sealed Poker TV's fate, though, was its refusal to evolve. While other industries were embracing the rise of digital platforms, Poker TV stubbornly stuck to its traditional ways. Twitch and YouTube were already starting to revolutionize how people consumed poker content. Fans didn't just want to watch anymore, they wanted to interact, to engage, to feel like they were part of the action. Creators like Joey Ingram, Doug Polk, Spraggy all understood this, building communities that felt fresh and dynamic. Meanwhile, Poker TV continued to push the same old product, oblivious to the shifting landscape. And then there was the elephant in the room, the absence of new stars. The golden age of Poker TV had been defined by its characters, Tony G, Esfandiari, Brunson. These were players with charisma, players who could light up a room without saying a word, or in Hellmuth's case by saying far too much. But as the years went on, the shows failed to introduce the next generation of poker personalities. The tables started to look the same, the players started to blur together, and the magic that had once captivated audiences began to fade. By the time the industry realized the extent of the problem, it was already too late. Poker TV wasn't just struggling, it was on life support. The budgets were gone, the innovation was non-existent, and the audience had moved on to better, more engaging platforms. What had once been a thriving cultural phenomenon was now a hollow shell, a reminder of what poker used to be. But if there's one thing poker teaches us, it's that the cards don't care about the past. No matter how great your last hand was, the next one could leave you broke. Poker TV learned this the hard way, and when the chips were down, it couldn't find a way to adapt. The fall was inevitable, and the table that had once been full of life was now empty, save for the echoes of a bygone era. And yet, instead of competing, Poker TV seemed resigned to its fate. Production budgets shrank to laughable levels, commentary became an afterthought, and the players who once carried the show started focusing on their own brands and ventures. The stars who made Poker TV must-watch entertainment, Hellmuth, Negreanu, Ivey, now had better platforms to tell their stories, leaving the shows that launched them behind. What had once been a stage for the world's best players became a revolving cast of unknown faces and uninspired games. The audience, once captivated by the tension of every hand, tuned out. And who could blame them? Poker TV didn't just lose its edge, it lost its soul. By the time the curtain finally started to fall, there was little left to save. The shows that had once defined an era were now relics of a time when poker ruled the airwaves. They hadn't just failed to keep up, they had folded before the cards were even dealt. The end wasn't dramatic or explosive, it was quiet, almost unnoticeable, as Poker TV slowly faded into the background of a game that had already moved on. Ironically, the rise of online poker content wasn't a death sentence for the game itself. If anything, it breathed new life into it. While Poker TV stumbled over its inability to adapt, streamers and YouTubers proved that the audience was still there. They just wanted something different. They wanted authenticity. They wanted moments that felt real, even if they came with rough edges and unpolished delivery. By the time Poker TV realized what it had lost, it was too late. The world had moved on, and the people who once tuned in religiously now found their fix elsewhere. The grandeur of Poker TV was gone, replaced by the immediacy and accessibility of the digital age. In the end, the fall of poker's biggest TV shows wasn't just a story of failure, it was a lesson. Poker didn't die when the cameras stopped rolling, it evolved. And while the bright lights of the old days may be dimmed, the game itself is still thriving, carried forward by a new generation who understands that poker's real magic isn't in the production value, it's in the people who play it. It's impossible to ignore the mistakes that led to its downfall. The refusal to innovate, the reliance on gimmicks, and the failure to embrace a new generation of players and viewers left Poker TV stuck in a time that no longer existed. It wasn't just that the world changed, it was that Poker TV refused to change with it. The game moved forward, but the shows that once defined it stayed behind, caught in a loop of nostalgia and diminishing returns. Today, poker thrives in a different form. Twitch streams, YouTube channels, and live events have filled the void, bringing the game to audiences in ways Poker TV never could. The faces at the table may be different, and the platforms may have changed, but the spirit of the game remains. It's no longer about polished productions or curated casts. It's about connection, community, and the love of the game. Poker TV may have folded, but the stories it left behind are unforgettable. And speaking of unforgettable stories, some of poker's biggest names have found themselves on the wrong side of the law. From gambling bust to outright scandal, the poker world has seen it all. Curious about which pros went from the felt to a cell? Click here to uncover the shocking tales of poker's most infamous jailbirds.